There we go. So our guest today is Angela Mombers from Walking Through History. Angela Mombers is a historical costume maker from the Netherlands. Together with her husband, Jasper, she runs the popular Walking Through History page on Facebook and Instagram, which they display pictures of their costumes and their process. Angela documents her posts, how the research was undertaken for each piece, and how they are created in the here and now with such great attention to fine detail work. The elaborate construction methods and embellishment truly make Angela's historical works come alive in the modern day. For the last 12 years, Angela has researched and reproduced dozens of costumes from various historical periods, roughly from 1400 to 1945 for herself, her husband, and friends. Angela uses period portraits of historical figures that feature heavy embroidery and other embellishments. This talk will focus particularly on these elements as a part of Angela's creative practice. Go ahead, Angela.
Yes. Welcome, everyone. Sorry, I have a little bit of a cold, but thank you, Lauren, for inviting me to the presentation, to the webinar. And I'm looking forward to show everybody some examples of my work and how I make my costumes. So we can move maybe to the first question.
So our first question is, what got you interested in historical garment making? Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yes, of course. Actually, it started with my parents, like my mom and my dad. When they met each other, they were, my dad was working at a castle as a guide, and he was also like wearing a lot of costumes for his work at the castle. And my mom and dad, they actually met each other on a party at the castle. So my mother, she was a teacher, she was studying to become a teacher in handcrafts. So she was very good with her hands, and I guess these two elements combined is how I grew up. You can maybe show the second slide. Yes, so here you can see my mom and my dad. So yeah, they are both also into period costuming, and my dad also helps Jasper and me on parties and events, in historical parties, and my mom also joins us often to events, and she does then her bobbin lace presentations. So I think it actually all started with my parents. So that's like almost 50 years ago. And yeah, I think I'm also really brought up with these two things, like the love for history, the love for handicrafts, and also the fact that, yeah, you're wearing historical costumes for certain events is like a very nice thing to do, because it's something that, yeah, my parents were also doing already. So yeah, but then comes puberty, and you're not really so interested anymore in all the stuff that your parents like. So I went a little bit in the other direction. But then, yeah, when you become a little bit older, yeah, you kind of go back to, you know, like your own history and how you were brought up. And my husband and I were always really very interested in history and like visiting castles. And we also went very often to events just to watch people, not really to wear costumes ourselves, but really to look at other people. And then at one day, it was, I think, 2009, something, 2010, we thought, okay, maybe we should also just go in costume. I was also doing a pattern making course at that time, and my husband was doing, Jasper was doing like a history education. So if you can move to slide number 3. And also at that moment, we were watching the Tudors on television. So I thought, wouldn't it be nice to recreate some costumes from that show because we really loved it, and we also really loved the costumes very much in the show. And yeah, I think those three things combined, my pattern making courses, Jasper's history courses, and the fact that we were watching the Tudors at the same time, kind of made us decide to also start making historical costumes. And yeah, we went to the event in costume, and it was really a lot of fun because instead of looking at other people, suddenly everybody was looking at us and making pictures and asking like, oh, where did you get that costume? And it was so much fun that from that moment onward, we decided to make a new costume every year for that event. And I think it got a little bit out of hand from there because from one costume per year, it became 2, 3, 4 costumes per year. And now it's almost like a non-stop thing that's going on forever. So yeah, that's actually how it all started.
Do your parents have a particular favorite time period that they like to portray? Does it coincide with yours?
I think my dad also really likes Napoleonic. So besides the Renaissance, because we do a lot of Renaissance costuming. So I also made a couple of Napoleonic costumes for him. And I guess my mom, she also really likes more, like medieval style. And then, of course, 16th, 17th century because of the bobbin lace, because that's really her passion. And that of course all started in that period. So yeah, I guess we do have like similar periods that we really like.
Do you have any particular regional costumes that you like? Is there a style, whether it's French or English or Dutch? Do you have a particular favorite?
Yeah, my favorite period, it's actually from like 1550 to 1650. If you also can move to the next slide, you have some examples. And then especially in the 17th century, of course, the Dutch were very, like kind of leading in trade and in navy and that kind of stuff. So they were, quite like, let's say, fashionable, and that's also for the 17th century what I like the most. And I would say for 16th century, I think the Dutch costume is a little bit less interesting, and then I am really more focused on like British and French fashion. And yeah, in the 16th century, those were also like the big countries, let's say, for fashion.
So can you talk about the challenges that you encounter when working from a painting to produce your garments? Obviously, a lot of historical garments have understructures, a lot of hidden things that we wouldn't necessarily think of in our modern wardrobe. So working from a painting where you're really just seeing the outermost elements, can you talk a little bit about your research on how you create the structure first and then the rest of the garment, particularly in mind with paintings don't have a back. We can't flip to the back and see the back of the garment.
Yeah, no, that's true, but that's particularly nice about, you see it here also on the left, you can see one girl is drafted from the back, and that is really quite nice. Like in the 16th and 17th century, there are in fact quite a few sketches to be found where people were drawn from the back, so you can also see the back of the dress. Of course, in paintings you only see the front, but also like Holbein did in the 16th century. And then of course this is Averkamp, for example, he did it a lot in the 17th century. So luckily there are images available of the back. So yeah, that's indeed one of the challenges. If you're making a costume, like what would the back look like, or even what would the bottom half look like, because sometimes you really only see the top part. Also, for example, I think if you move to next slide. think I had a couple of slices. Yeah, I think a few more. Yeah, here, this one. So yeah, this is a very nice example of a couple of things that I did wrong, or like I didn't know about this costume. And like the first one was, I was really convinced by looking at this painting that her jacket was made from linen. So I made my reproduction also from linen. And then only later I figured out it was actually made from leather, which also makes much more sense if you see all the, like the big stitches on the armhole and on the front. Then yeah, with linen, it's not necessary to have those big stitches, but with leather, it's more, yeah, likely. And also like the oversleeves that she was wearing, that was also something that, yeah, it was not clear for me what it was exactly. So yeah, those kind of things really take a lot of reading into the painting, like trying to find everything there is on the internet that there's written and investigated about all these paintings. And yeah, there I learned then that the jacket had to be leather, and yeah, the oversleeves are really for like protecting her garment. So yeah, those kind of things always take like a lot of time, a lot of research, like reading into the painting and trying to figure out what everything is. And especially in working class costumes, you see a lot of functional garments that are really there for a reason and not just because they're pretty. So yeah, so this is a really nice example of it. And I think if you go to the next slide.
Just to pause, because we
Yeah.
didn't really visit your husband's costume.
Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit about the challenges of menswear versus women's wear?
I think that the main challenge is with women's that you have like stays or corsets underneath. So it's much more fitted, and also with like boning inside and everything. And yeah, I have to say, actually, besides that, there's not so much difference because the men's garments are also very elaborated and very decorated, sometimes even more than the women's. And this is a very nice example of it, because I believe this costume, it has like, I don't remember, but like 800 buttons or something. So it really,
Oh
like,
my goodness, 800 buttons.
It was really a lot of work to make it. So, and yeah, as you can see, I mean, he's not less dressed than a woman would have been in the 17th century. But the inner work is a little bit easier because it's a canvas, and it has it does have some filling and some structure, but not bones, for example, like a lady's garment would have. So, but yeah, besides that, I think they're equally challenging.
Now, do you find that when you're selecting costumes to choose, do you choose them together, or in an effort to coordinate the pieces, or do you choose your subjects independently?
Usually, I make them for certain events. So maybe we are asked to come to a certain event, and that's in a specific period, for example. I think that's actually the most, the reason why we choose certain costumes, what happens the most. And what I do then is I look for a couple of examples of costumes from that period and also from that class and, you know, country. And then also some examples for Jasper and some examples for me. And then we kind of decide together on, yeah, what I'm gonna make. I also really like it if we are like clearly a couple, that our costumes kind of match together. So yeah, we kind of decide on that together.
Lovely.
Yeah.
We'll go back to our other slide.
Yeah, so this is a very nice example of what can be a challenge, and that is finding the right material. So yeah, obviously the sleeves and the partlet of her dress are embroidered with flowers, well, you can search high and low for that fabric, but it will be very difficult to find it. And then, yeah, there's only one way to solve it, and that's to make it yourself. So so that's what I did. So it's embroidered by hand, and I think it took me like 8 months to do it. So I didn't work on it full time, of course, but still, like, if you have like a spare hour, then yeah, altogether it took me like 8 months. And what is a very nice detail, I think, about like the sleeves, they're mirrored. So the flowers go on one sleeve, they go in one direction, and in the other sleeve they go in the other direction. And like that, those kind of details I find very interesting and fascinating. And yeah, it only shows that this could not have been done in a different way than by hand, and because otherwise you can never achieve, yeah, that kind of effect. So yeah, so that's also a major challenge, just to find the right materials, and also like the cording on her body, like with the gold. So yeah, that's also something that I had to make myself, because it was just not possible to find anything that looked like that exactly.
One of my favorite pieces that I see in a number of your garments is always the ruffs. And obviously some of them have understructures. And of course, there's a starching process. Can you talk a little bit about making your ruffs? We get a lot of questions about those types of things.
Yeah. Yeah, well, the ruff is a very interesting garment, because it's actually nothing more than a very long strip of fabric. It can be like 5 or 6 meters long, or maybe even more, double. And it's gathered very tight to a neckband. And that's basically the only thing it is. And then the way it looks with the figure 8, that's all done afterwards. So that's done with starch and with setting, and like a hot iron to make it stiff. And then basically, if you wash it, you will wash it out again, and you can set the ruff again, and you can set it in a different shape, for example. So the basis of a ruff is usually always the same, and then by pleating, you can create all kinds of different styles with it. So yeah, it's a very interesting garment. It's very time consuming, and also because if you have worn it once, then if you have to wash it again and starch it again, yeah, that easily takes
It's a process.
Yeah, it takes you like three nights or 3 evenings to reset it. And yeah, it's yeah, in those days also it was very often done elsewhere, so people would just bring their ruffs to like a rough laundry, let's say, and there they would wash it and set it, and then you could pick it up again to wear it.
I love the ones that they would temporarily dye, either the pink or the yellow. Quite fascinating.
Yeah, with the saffron, and with they would add like indeed colored powder to the water to give it a color. Yeah, that's interesting.
And this earlier Dutch costume, you did have to create a bit of an understructure, or was that a different piece? I remember you creating a wire understructure for one of your
is
that in this particular piece?
Yeah, also the headpiece also, there's also a wire in there, and also under the collar there are often wires, because yeah, if you don't do that, then you will not reach the same look as on the painting. You cannot get it to stand up that high. Also the cap is also stiffened with starched to also stay like this, and then the wire also keeps it in place.
Does your mother make your lace pieces, or is that something that you find other resources for?
Yeah, this one not yet. So this one is a lace that I bought, but she is now at the moment very busy with making lots of laces, because we're actually going to start a color making workplace. So
wonderful.
Yeah, so it's something that we will be presenting during events, and then we show people the whole process. So the lace making, and also the sewing, also the starching and the setting. So yeah, that's something that we are very busy with at the moment. My mom is now making all the laces, and then I have to make all the colors. And yeah, we bought a tent, a really big tent that we can use
Wonderful.
for the presentation, and looking very much forward to yeah, presenting it. It will be in July for the first time. So
Wonderful,
yeah.
wonderful. Maybe we
Yeah.
could have you back next year to talk about your making in the lace.
Yeah.
So for our next question,
Mm-hmm.
many of your garments are quite embellished. You talked a little bit about creating the embroidery for your flowers on the
Mm-hmm.
previous image. Do you have favorite techniques that you like to employ, particularly for embellishment? Or something
Yeah.
that when you choose a costume, you prefer the beading or some
Mm-hmm.
element of trim more than others?
Yeah, definitely. So I love beads. I think it's quite clear also from lots of my costumes, because they contain a lot of beadwork. And that is also something that I've been doing already like my whole life. I think I was already making little bracelets and little necklaces when I was maybe 3 or 4 years old, because already when I was very little, I really liked beads in general. So I'm actually very happy that I can combine it with costume making, because it's quite an let's say easy and effective way to add decorations to a gown, especially if you use like these really big metal things that you can see here on the chest, for example. They're like very effective, let's say, to really create the look. And I think that's also maybe one of the reasons why I like Renaissance so much, because there you see a lot of this they call them ouches, like the metal things with the pearls inside, or with like gemstones inside. And that's it's very nice to work with. Yeah, and I have also another technique. I think it's on the next slides. Oh yeah, no, that's another example of the beadwork. Yeah, so this is like they call it a henin or henin. It's like a hat in the mid 15th century. And there it already kind of starts all the embellishments with beads and braid work and things like that. So
What would you say is your heaviest garment?
it's exactly the dress that you see here. The headpiece is not that heavy, but this dress is very heavy, and it's because I used a very heavy velvet for it. It was actually more like a curtain fabric, and I'm seriously considering remaking this gown in a different fabric, because I think it's like 12 kilos, which is like 25 pounds in the US.
Yes, it is.
Yeah.
Wonderful.
So it's really heavy, and of course most of the events are in the summer, and then you can imagine wearing a gown like this. It's actually 2 gowns on top of each other, and they're both made from velvet. So
and I've seen a few that people chose to fur line, because they would have, it would have been quite cold during that time period. Can you imagine wearing all the fur on top of such a heavy garment?
Yeah, this one is also fur lined.
Oh no.
Yeah, but only
it's beautiful though. It's beautiful.
Yeah, it's only in the sleeves, luckily. But I think all these things together, it was of course much colder in those days. So you also had like a little ice age, let's say, in those days. So it was quite a few degrees lower the temperature than it is nowadays. And but it is a very nice costume. So I think I'm going to make it again in a different fabric. Yeah. So so this is another nice example of a technique that I've used it once on a costume, and this gown is decorated with beetle wings. So it's the wings of a beetle, literally what it is, and it was a practice that was common in the 19th century. So the beetles, they would come from India in those days, or the wings, let's say. I think even the embroidery must have been done there. Yeah, it's really a lot of fun to make it. If you go to the next slide, I have some pictures of how I do it. So first of all, I always draft the design on the pattern, on the paper pattern. And then, yeah, you have your bag with beetle wings, and you have to clip them to the right size. So I use like a nail scissor for that, because you have to make like a diamond shape or a circle or like teardrop from them. Those are the most common shapes. And then I use a seam ripper, and I drill 4 holes in them. And you have to be a little bit careful because the material is not very hard. It's also not very soft, but also not very hard, and you can break it. So you have to do it a little bit carefully. Yeah, and then after that you can just yeah, sew them on by hand with some sewing yarn.
When you purchase beetle wings, do you typically buy them by weight or count?
Yeah, they come in a bag with the amount, because they're so light. Like this bag is like 500 pieces, and it's really like, I don't know, 20 grams or something. It's so light. You really don't.
Interesting.
Yeah, it's yeah. I often get the question from people. Don't you feel sad for the animals that they're killed over the wings? But in fact, they're not killed for the wings. So they're being eaten in Thailand. So it's like a delicacy to eat them. And then the wings, they are like a side product, like basically like leather with a cow, let's say. So yeah, they're not killed for the wings. So
Do you find that a garment like this with so much delicate embellishment is a challenge to store?
yeah, yeah, it is. And this one is also hanging separate from the rest. So all my gowns are on rails, but this one is not, because it absolutely cannot be like squeezed together, because
Absolutely.
yeah, and they will definitely break. And also, if I wear the gown, then always I have to make a few repairs afterwards. Maybe like 5 or 10 beetle wings have been broken, and I have to repair them. Yeah, I think on the next slide I'm showing some more technical things on the beetle wings. Yeah, so this was the skirt, and like how I always do it with light fabrics, I draft the design on the paper pattern, and then I use like a light box to transfer the design directly to the fabric. So I just use a pencil and draft the pattern, because, for example, this skirt was made from 8 panels and they were all embroidered in the same way. So yeah, first transfer the design to the fabric, and then first you see like a cord embroidery. So this is like a braiding, let's say, a cord that's stitched on. And then the stems of the flowers are embroidered first. And then I put on the beetle wings. So all that other stuff I do first. And then, yeah, on the end, some more beads were added for decoration. So that's basically how I make the panels. Yeah.
So for this
And
particular gown, do you know approximately how many hours or how long it took for you to produce it?
it's actually, it goes quite fast, I have to say, because yeah, the
Lovely.
beetle wings, it's only like 4 holes, so the sewing on goes quite quickly, and it's almost like some kind of mass production that you're doing, because you're really like sitting there drilling. So you're drilling for a couple of days, and then you're sewing for a couple of days. So I think it was maybe like 3 or 4 months, not exceptionally more than other costumes.
Are there spangles or beads at the tips of
Yeah,
the beetle
also.
wings?
Yeah. So that's often combined. So they would often use braiding, embroidering, beads, and beetle wings all in one work, let's say. So not just the beetle wings on its own. And what's also very interesting, as you can see it here on the right, is that you have different shades, and they all come together in one bag. So you really have to first sort them out per color, because there are like really a lot of different shades, and that's also something that you can play with if you're making a design. Yeah, so here you see some more examples of braiding. That is a technique that I use very much in my costumes, especially in 18th and 19th century costumes. You see it a lot, and it's basically stitching on a cord on the fabric. And if you scroll to the next slide, I also show here how it's done. So again, first I draft the whole design on the paper pattern, and then I use this, it's like a carbon paper. It's like a chalk paper, and you can use your, what's it called? The wheel knife.
The pricker, okay.
Yeah, exactly. So I use that thing to transfer the design from the paper to the fabric, because this is of course a dark fabric. You cannot use the light box. So in the first picture you see all the chalk lines on the garment, and then one by one I start to stitch on the cords. And luckily I've become very handy with doing that with a machine. Because
the souttage has sort of like a divot in the middle that you can stitch through.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that's I use both cord and souttage. So the picture below is like a normal cord, a regular cord. And I have to say, you don't really see the stitch, so it kind of disappears into the cord. So that's very nice. And
I have to say the Hussar's dolman's probably my favorite. I love it so much. It's very beautiful.
Yeah. On the next slide you see some more examples. So here, this is souttage indeed. And then indeed you stitch in the middle, like it has this line indeed in the middle. The only thing is that if you make like a very sharp turn, like on the blue garment, what you see, if you stitch in the middle, it will flip over. So in those turns, you really have to stitch on the outer edge of the on the souttage. Yeah. So
one fun question. Sorry to interrupt. One fun question that we always get is, how do you calculate how much souttage you need for a dolman?
Yeah, it's almost impossible. It's now I know, but before I didn't know, and I would just buy 50, 75 meters, whatever. And I know now that it's a little bit less than that. So I think it was per jacket, it's around 20 meters what I need. So but it's very difficult to, and I just buy a lot so that I'm not short.
Never a bad idea. Never a bad idea to buy a lot, because of course, if you don't buy enough, you can't find it again.
Yeah, and I can always use it again for another costume later. So I don't really mind having these kind of materials on stock. And I usually also go to like a wholesale shop to buy it, and then it's a bit cheaper than to go to a regular store, because then you pay a bit more for it. This is another nice example. This is a costume I made for my sister, and it's also braiding. It's also cord. So these are actually wider cords, because you can go up to whatever you like, 3, 4, 5 centimeters. But even in the 20th century, you would still see it a lot on costumes, and it's a very effective and nice way of decorating. And I also really like the contrasts that you can make with it. So I always use a lot of like black on colored, or colors on white, or gold. So it really stands out very much, and it's very attractive, I think.
Was this a costume that she chose for herself, or is this something you wanted to make and you asked her to wear it for you?
No, she chose it, and I was actually surprised, because I didn't think she would choose this. It was not. I don't think it was her style, but she really liked it, and
that's lovely.
I think she likes. She likes a little bit military style, so I can see why she chose this. But I wouldn't have guessed it myself.
Very lucky sister.
Yeah, she loves it. Yeah. So this is for the next question.
So you do quite a bit of research, and I'm sure it's always an ongoing project for you. But how much research, and what is essentially your approach to it before you actually begin sourcing, cutting, making your patterns. Can you talk a little bit about your research process?
Yeah, of course. Yeah, so what I do first, well, first of all, I have to really be attracted by the design, because obviously I'm spending so much time on a dress. It has to be something, yeah, that I find very interesting to, dive into, or to, really try a lot of different options. So this was one of those. It's like a gown from 1660. With a very very particular look. It has like this really big wide neckline, like the shoulders are almost more on your arms than on your actual shoulders. And then as you can see on the picture on the left, it has a very narrow back panel with gigantic sleeves and like big sleeve wings. So this is like a very typical dress for a certain period, which I found was very interesting. So what I first do is I'm searching for as many paintings as I can. So I think if you go to the next slide, you will see a few examples. Yeah, so these are all that kind of dress. So all these paintings are, yeah, like roughly from 1660. And all these ladies are wearing these gowns. And so I try to find images of the back. I try to see like, okay, what do they have in common? What was very particular for this dress or for this period? And then of course I have to implement those things in my gown as well, because that is what makes it typical for that period. So after I decided how I want it to look, I go search for patterns. And I like to use pattern books that make patterns out of garments from musea. So if you move to the next slide, you will see some examples of it. Oh yeah, no, sorry, this was another thing in between. So luckily there are also some surviving pieces of dresses from this period. And that's of course always very nice, because then you can see what it really looked like instead of only on paintings.
Do you take
And
some study trips to go visit these items in person as well?
yeah, exactly. And sometimes you can even ask musea if you can have a closer look if they're not on display or something. I've done that in the past, and then they would take it from storage. Not all musea do that, but yeah, if you have a good story, I guess, then sometimes they're willing to help you with that. And the nice thing about the websites from musea is that they place often a lot of pictures. So also from the inside, from the backside, from all sides. So that is of course very helpful on all the details. So here are a few of those dresses from 1660. And I think now the pattern part is maybe on the next slides. Yeah, okay. So there I found 3 patterns of a 1660s dress. Here are 3 books. These books I use quite often. So Nora Wong is number 1, and then Janet Arnold is the second. And then you have a series from the Victoria and Albert Museum, 17th century women's dress patterns, and also you have also men's patterns. They have a couple of books, and I always find it very interesting to figure out how different are they, because obviously they all make their own patterns based on the pieces they have in their museums. And then I'm always very curious, like which one would fit me best or looks best like the design that I chose. So in this case I worked all 3 of them out, and then I make like a trial, like a mock-up to actually wear. And I think you can see those on the next slide. Yeah, so here you see all 3 of them. You see on the top, you see their original design. So that's the actual museum piece. And then the row below is my mock-up based on the pattern they placed in the book. And for me, it was
very obvious that number 3 was the nicest. So this one was really for me the most appealing design and fit, let's say. And also I didn't have to make so many adjustments to fit it to my own body, because of course in those days people were much smaller than we are. So you always have to add width and length to the patterns. And in this case, it was, quite easy on the last one. So I chose number 3. And I think on the next slide, you can actually see like the front, the side, and the back. And then on the upper row, you see the garment from the Victorian Albert. And on the bottom is my mock-up. So I usually make more than one, because I do some adjustments on the fit, and then I make another one, and then I do some more adjustments, and I make sometimes really like 3 or 4 mock-ups until I'm really absolutely satisfied with the fit. Because once I start embroidering, there's no way I can change it anymore. And also with the inner layers and like the canvases, it all becomes very rigid and stiff, and then there's no way you can, change it anymore. So so that's always a very important part. And I guess these 2 things, so like the research, the pattern, and then the toile making, that can already take up like 2 months of time, because it just takes a lot of time to get it all perfect. And for me, the fit is really so important. And after that, the fun begins, of course, because then you can start with the real fabrics and the real silks and all the embellishments. And that's of course always so much fun.
I know this neck piece is another one of those wired structured frames.
Yeah, correct.
Were you able to find examples again for the understructure pieces for this?
Yeah. So luckily, it's they have quite a few surviving pieces from this period, and so you can find all these things in the books. So Janet Arnold is like usually the one I start with, because that's the best documented. And there are other examples too, but usually these kind of things you can already find there. And also like really close-up pictures and how it was made. Like those books are very technical and very helpful if you want to recreate it yourself. And so these are also made after the actual things that are in musea. And
So of your costumes, I know this is sometimes quite difficult. Do you have a favorite?
It is a bit difficult, because I don't think that I really have one favorite. So I put this one on my slide because it is one of my favorites. I really like the color very much. So I'm a very big fan of color. I always try to use like lots of like red and gold, and
that fabric's beautiful.
I don't know, very striking green and blue, very striking colors in my costumes. And this is just I don't know, I it's too difficult for me. I like them all.
So obviously throughout history, particularly with women's shapewear, as you've pictured here, it goes through a number of transitions while people are still wearing structural undergarments. The silhouettes change quite a bit. So of course you have to have the right underpinnings, or the silhouette of the dress will not be quite right. So can you talk a little bit about these particular understructured garments?
Yeah, of course. So what I always say to everybody is start with a shirt. So you can actually easily tell the difference from somebody who doesn't know and people who know, because you often see people like wearing a nice dress, but then they don't put the shirt underneath it. And that's really something that was absolutely not done in those days. So no matter how tight your costume is, still they would wear a shirt underneath it to just protect the costume, from sweat or grease or whatever from your body. And of course the costumes are very difficult to clean. So yeah, it also helps me to keep it clean. So yeah, so that's number one. Always start with the shirt. Yeah, and then on top of that, you would wear like your corset or your stays, or a kirtle, which is maybe without bones, but still with very heavy canvas inside. But of course, women weren't wearing a bra back then, so you need something to, you know, to do the same job, let's say. So that's always the layer that goes next after the shirt. And then, of course, the shape of the stays or the corset is very much depending on the time period. Yeah, in the 16th century, they really liked like very flat fronts, and like later in the 18th century, they would like it maybe more voluminous or whatever. And it's also the same for the fillings that you use. So you use like a bum roll or like panniers or like a farthingale, and that's all the structures that go more under the skirt and around your hips to really give your skirt a certain shape. And that also just depends so much on the period, because you can see the fashion really changing. Well, in the 19th century, it's even changing per few years, but yeah, it's very much yeah, showing you what period clothing you are wearing. So yeah, very important.
I often find that some costumers too, they omit petticoats, and many dresses need petticoats over their boned areas. You see like the boning lines, do you know what I mean?
Yeah, you mean like on the skirt part, you mean?
Yeah, I've seen a number of costume individuals that they'll put on a farthingale and no petticoat over the top, and so you'll see the actual ribs of the bones through their outer dress.
Oh, yeah. Then their petticoats are maybe not like wide enough, because actually, yeah,
sometimes they omit them entirely. They don't put petticoats over there.
Yeah, and then you will see the bones. Yeah, and that's very ugly.
Yeah, it's not cute.
Yeah.
Not a cute look.
Yeah. Yeah, so what I always do, so if I have like my farthingale, which also of course has the bone lines, yeah, of course they're there, you can't avoid it. And then I usually wear 2 petticoats over it, and they are both 4 meters in so that's like I think 5 yards or something, 4.5 yards in diameter. So they're really like lots of pleats in there, and then 2 of those on top of each other, and then you really will not see those lines anymore, definitely. So yeah, so that's all about.
You must have very full suitcases when you travel to an event.
Yeah. Yeah, well, actually that's maybe also one of the reasons why we've never done an event that involved flying with a plane, because I'm just so worried to bring all that.
I can imagine.
Yeah, so we've only done it by car, and then indeed your whole car is filled with costumes, like, and cases with accessories and hats and wigs and all that stuff. And it's yeah, it's quite a lot that you have to carry with you on events. Yeah, but it's okay. We've done it already for a while, so we'll get around.
So you just talked a little bit, obviously, about hats and wigs and other accessories, and they are very much important for completing sort of the final look.
Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit? I know a lot of people aren't willing to make shoes and you shouldn't expect it, but can you talk a little bit about sourcing important accessories, especially if you can't make them from scratch and maybe they're modifiable or what have you?
Yeah, so like for example, my hats, I always make them myself. I myself very much enjoy making hats because it's a relative small project compared to a gown, and you can really use all your scraps and pieces from the gown, like all the little pieces of tape or gallon or whatever you have left. You can use it on the hat, so that's always I think very nice. And also I like to add a lot of beadwork to my hats as well. Then yeah, collars and cuffs, we already talked about it a little bit, so those I also always make myself. And yeah, they're usually just made from straight strips of fabric, and you add some darts to the strip to actually give it a shape. But it's basically nothing more than that. So they're not that difficult to make, and of course very important for, you know, all the small details in your costume that make it yeah, special, let's say. Yeah, I also added another picture of pockets. That's also something that I really like a lot. Yeah, it's actually on the previous slide. Yeah. So a lot of the skirts from the women, they had like slits on the side, and instead of having the pockets sewn into the skirt like what we would nowadays do, they would just have two loose bags tied around their waist with a ribbon. And then through the slit in your skirt, and you can see also in those pockets that there's a slit. You can access the pockets, and that way you can still carry some stuff with you. So also very handy if you have an event, then you can still bring your phone or something without anybody seeing it. Yeah, shoes is always a little bit challenging. I have done a few times like making my own shoes from modern shoes, let's say. Like for example, a Chelsea boot has like a lot of material which you can cut away, and that way you can create, well, let's say kind of fish historical shoes. But yeah, since the last couple of years I kind of stepped away from that, because you would still need like a leather sole, or you know, it's just really not nice if you have like a rubber sole underneath it. So there are luckily a couple of companies that make shoes. Lots of them are in countries like Czech, or like more the Eastern European countries. I'm not so sure about the US. But yeah, so luckily they are available. Oh yeah, American Duchess is a nice one in the US.
That's a US company.
Yeah, exactly. So that's then for me rather expensive to order there, but yeah, she also has very nice reproductions of shoes, also 16th and 17th century.
Yeah, they
So,
recently expanded into those styles, and they
yeah.
do menswear, which is nice.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So yeah, so nowadays we always buy our shoes, and yeah, it's of course, yeah, not cheap, but it's important, I think. I mean, if you're already spending so much time and money on your costume, then I think your shoes also deserve it to yeah, to
Can you
spend some
talk a
money on
little
it.
bit also about the hair pieces as well?
Mhm.
Do you make your own wigs? Do you have a particular stylist maybe that you go to? Because obviously with some pieces you just need a hair piece, and other ones may need a full wig. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I have both, but I mainly use hair pieces actually. And I have yeah, an address in I think it's also in Czech. Yeah, a lady who makes them for me. And they're very easy because I have quite long hair myself, and I can just really tie my own hair to the back on the ponytail, and I can cover it with the whole hairpiece. So I'm also done very quickly, because I'm just really not good with doing my own hair. That's really not my thing.
I know the feeling.
So yeah. So for me, really, my clothes are the thing. But I always find it so, yeah, good of people who can do their own hair, like 18th century, like big hair.
Yes.
It's yeah, it's really like a separate how do you say that, separate knowledge.
Yeah, it's a separate study.
Yeah, exactly. And
quite
I'm
separate
just
from
not good at
costume making. And I
Yeah.
know in the US, it's quite a different department, the wig makers. I've seen
Yeah.
videos, it's quite fascinating.
Yeah, exactly. And it's something that I could never do. Yeah, here, oh yeah, here on the next picture you see indeed that we are wearing wigs, both of us. They're also made by that same lady that does my hair pieces. Yeah, I always find with wigs, yeah, sometimes, yeah, it's so difficult because you can see so clearly that it's a wig, and that I really don't like. So I always prefer to cover them like the edge with a hat or something.
Mhm.
You of course do have these like
The
Front
lace,
lacing wigs, or how do you call
Mhm.
them? Lace wigs?
the
Yeah.
lace.
Yeah, exactly. Those are of course much better, but yeah, also quite expensive, and you also
I
still
do
need to make.
know, oh, sorry. I do know that in the US, there are several companies that will make a transitional wig that you can use for more than one that can be easily styled from.
Yeah,
Um,
exactly, because that's what I wanted to say. I mean, if you've worn it then a few times, it actually needs to be redone again, and then yeah, it's also quite a costly thing, let's say. Yeah.
So for our viewers, do you have any advice? A lot of people are interested in costume making, but are quite intimidated by how to start. So could you give them a
Mhm.
little advice on what your approach would be?
Yes. Well, first of all, I would say choose something that you really like something that really attracts you, because you're going to be spending a lot of time on it, and also a lot of redoing and taking it apart again, doing it again, because I also still have that all the time. So it's nice to choose something that you are actually willing to put all this effort in. And then yeah, if you really want to make it like accurate, then just do all the research and try to find as much as you can about what are the pieces, why are they wearing it. Like if you're doing working class, especially then it's very important, because you also have like a lot of certain like jobs or trades that people are in, which require particular clothing. So, and that's all quite strict, let's say. So it's really very nice to really dive into it. And then I always say also, just don't use the cheap material, because you're going to be spending so much time and hours, and then it's such a pity if you use, like, I don't know, synthetic material or whatever. So I always use like real wool, real linen, real silk, and compared to the amount of work you're going to put in, it's worth it. So I always want to say that, like, don't use I don't know, polyester or something.
Well, also too, I used to do theater, and sometimes when they would do, the polyester synthetic materials, the actors would actually pass out because you get quite overheated in all the layers, and natural fibers allow the heat to release, and the other ones not so much.
Yeah, exactly. And a lot of people think, oh, wool, but wool, you won't wear wool in the summer because it's
It
really
breathes.
warm. Yeah, but actually it breathes. And you also
Mhm.
have like very fine wools. And also in those days, people would wear wool in the summer. So
All year round, yeah.
yeah, exactly. And it's actually a very nice material, and also to work with. It's very nice to stitch. And yeah, it's yeah, yeah, it's
So
nice to work with.
one last question from me, and that will be, do you have a number of costumes? Do you know how many you've made over the years, or is it not quite known?
Yeah, no, I've never counted, but
If you had to guess.
I'm guessing it will be maybe around 60 or something.
Goodness gracious, that's quite
Yeah.
a few.
Yeah, so I think I think I have about double the amount of Jasper. And then besides that, I've also made quite a few costumes for other reenactors, and also for my family, like my dad and my sister, like I showed you. And also I did some museum pieces, some museum work.
Wonderful.
So, yeah, so I think around 60. Yeah,
Wonderful.
something. Yeah.
So one question that we do get a lot, and this is both for embroidery and even within the own school, is sourcing resources. Would you be willing to put together a bibliography, just a list of recommendations or books that you would suggest? And you could send that to me if it's convenient. If it's not convenient,
Yeah,
okay.
no, that's yeah, sure. I don't mind that at all. I have quite a nice little library, let's say, at my
Wonderful.
home. I think most of the books that are on the market, I was able to, to get them. And there are actually really a lot of books about making historical costumes. So, and also a lot of pattern books. Yeah, I've already showed a couple. I also use the ones from, for example, the Tudor tailor a lot. They also have like five books or something. So yeah, there are really a lot of books. So I can show you, I can send you a list, and then I can
Wonderful.
also point out the ones I use the most, because I also have a lot of books that I
Wonderful.
have, but maybe haven't used yet.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So if you're a-okay, we can start taking questions from our guests.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So our first question comes from Lynn Stieglitz. What type of bobbin lace does your mother make and demonstrate?
Yeah, so she is very interested in the early lace. And so she is really investigating in 16th and 17th century lace. She has been making bobbin lace already for a very long time. I think for maybe like 30 or 40 years.
Wonderful. But she's quite fast.
Yeah, so she's very fast. When she started making lace, she was not really doing historical lace, but more like fancy stuff for in your house or whatever, like little things for on your table or stuff. And yeah, since a couple of years, she's more interested in the lace that we can actually use in the costumes. So
wonderful.
she's also
what a great resource.
Yeah, she's also applying the lace on her own costumes. And then she's particularly interested in like the really early lace, and she was able to find some patterns and some books online about it. Yeah, because she really needs a pattern to make the lace, because I don't know how to make bobbin lace, and I'm like, hey mom, this is a very nice color, can you make this for me? And she's like, no, I can't make it because I don't have a pattern, because apparently that's very important to have this. So yeah, then we go through her patterns and find something which is the most similar. Yeah.
Wonderful.
So,
So our next question comes from Emily. Are there elements of designing costumes that you have found that you can't live without in your everyday clothing because they're a part of your personal style?
So, oh yeah, she means like if I interpret it also in my daily life. Yeah, well, I have kind of said goodbye to modern clothing since around 2015. And I wear more like the vintage style, like the 30s, 40s style clothing. So I don't know if that is what she means.
I think so.
Yeah. So I found that because I actually work for a fashion company, like modern fashion, in my like 9 to 5, let's say. And I worked already for a long time. And in the beginning, I was only wearing, like the clothing for my work. And then at one point I thought, I'm not going to do this anymore. It doesn't fit. It doesn't suit me. It doesn't fit me. And I don't like it. Because I think that the way people were wearing clothes in the past is actually much nicer for your figure or your, for like how
I can agree with that.
Yeah. Yeah. So so I gave up on modern clothing about 8 years ago, and I'm only wearing like vintage style clothing ever since. Yeah.
So our next question comes from Maria, and Maria asks, how did you find out that garment you mentioned before was made leather instead of linen?
Yeah, because I read about it. I read it in an article, and actually I could have known. Because if you look at the painting from the milkmaid, if you look at it very like zoomed in, you will see like a lot of stitches around the armhole and on the shoulder. They're like quite rough, let's say. And of course, if it was lineage, you would have been able to stitch that very neatly. But with leather, of course, you need to punch it, and you have to use like a thick cord to stitch it together. So I could have known. And yeah, it all fell together when I read that article. I thought, okay, it's leather.
Our next question comes from Catherine Brega Palmer. On Elizabeth of Austria, are the ribbon sleeves done in a spiral?
Yeah, the decoration on the sleeves, she means?
I think so.
Yeah, they're done in a spiral. Yeah, and that was actually quite challenging
because my sleeve is not a straight sleeve, but it's a curved sleeve. So it's like a two-piece sleeve. And I still wanted the stripes, or let's say the puff details, I wanted it to match on the seams also. It was quite a challenge to make it still look even while my sleeve was getting curved and more narrow, let's say. But yeah, indeed, she spotted that very well. And it's also very nice because you can also, again, do it mirrored left and right, and you get the spirals
Wonderful.
like this. Yeah.
So our next question comes from an anonymous attendee. Do you make your own jewelry for these pieces?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I really love making jewelry. Yeah. So I'm not like a goldsmith, so I cannot like warm it up and
It's
weld
more
it and all that.
assemblage.
Yeah, exactly. It's more assembling. So yeah, I use like the wire and the beads and like all the tools that if you make your own and I really like it very much to make necklaces or earrings and also like things for in your hair or on your cap. And very often I would actually make like let's say something similar to like a necklace and then sew it on the garment. So you could actually take it off again and then it would still be like one piece. So it's a nice way of attaching the beads to a garment is to first make like one thing out of it, like a string or whatever, and then just to sew it on because it becomes very even and straight and all that.
So our next question comes from Jean Combs Henry. Have you ever tried wrapping ruffs on a pegboard?
What is wrapping was on a?
Wrapping your ruffs on a pegboard. I saw an early Dutch woman making historic caps with neck ruffs. She wrapped the rough cloth back and forth on a long board with 2 rows of wooden pegs, then stitched the cloth together before removing the pegboard.
I think that is something that they do in the 18th and the 19th century, right?
I'm not sure with that method. I'm more familiar with the irons, the irons that you would shape and starch them in.
Yeah.
That's outside of my experience.
Yeah, I haven't. Is it like a pleating board that he means, or?
Could be. I'm not entirely sure.
Yeah. But no, I haven't. Yeah. So yeah, usually how I do it. Okay, so you first have to like wash your ruff or make it wet, then dip it in starch, and you have to make sure that the starch is really like everywhere. You really have to like make sure it gets really into the fiber. Then you have to let it dry, and it takes a very long time to dry because especially really deep in the pleats. It can take really like 4 days to dry, and if you don't let it dry properly, it can stick to your iron, and that's not good. Let's say so. It has
to
to
get
really
mildewy too. Mildewy, yeah.
And then when it's completely dry, you have to set it with irons. And in the past, they would use like poking sticks that they would heat up with, in coal or in fire, whatever. But you can nowadays you can use like a curling iron for your hair because it basically does the same thing. And then you have to just spray the pleat a little bit wet with a spray bottle, and then you put the curling iron in, and you put it really tight around it and until it's dry, and then you move on to the next pleat. So that's basically what comes closest to how it was done in those days. Yeah. And then they would fixate the pleats with like a little pin, for example, or they would also
where the phrase "your pin money" comes from.
Yeah. And also they would sometimes use like a drop of wax, like hot wax, to kind of glue them together.
Interesting.
Yeah. And I very often, because I find it a little bit scary, all these pins near my neck.
Yeah, I can
I was
imagine.
afraid I lose one.
Do you
So
use the? Oh, sorry.
Yeah, I usually just tack it together with a few stitches. That's usually how I do it. Yeah.
Do you I know a lot of garments, you have to be pinned in as per the
Yeah.
historical. Do you use the historically reproduced pins or do you use the contemporary?
Yeah, I have a few contemporary. They're like found in the soil,
Mhm,
but they're completely black, and I'm always
mhm.
afraid they might stain on my clothes. Plus, they're also not very strong, let's
Oh, but
say.
have you done like a reproduction? Because I believe there are some people making historically
Oh yeah,
accurate
sorry.
pins.
Yeah, I know what you mean. Yeah, the
Yes, yes,
really
yes.
nice one with the decorative ends and all that. Yeah. Yeah, I use modern ones. But I have a couple of those because sometimes it's
Nice.
nice to show them. Like if you have, for
Absolutely.
example, a veil which has to be pinned to a cap,
Mhm.
then it's always nice to really show those pins. Yeah, and then I like to use those reproduction ones indeed because they're often very nicely made with nice like spiral heads or something.
Mhm. Does
Yeah.
the Tudor tailor carry them? I believe that's,
I think so. Yeah, I
yeah.
think so. But I usually see a lot of people on fairs that make them.
Oh, wonderful,
Yeah,
wonderful.
yeah, and that sell them. So yeah, yeah.
So our next question comes from Logan Van Hagen. Have you used the sprang weaving techniques? Do you know if this was something used in the Netherlands in the 16th and 17th centuries?
And what kind of technique was that?
The sprang weaving technique. It's not one I'm familiar with.
Spring weaving. I don't know about that because if it's about weaving fabrics, yeah, I have never woven a fabric myself. So
Okay.
yeah, I know that there are reenactors that do it. That actually really want to make like their garments from scratch, and that means also like weaving their own fabric. And I know it takes years to make enough fabric to weave enough fabric to make like a whole set of clothes from it. So yeah, I've not done that yet. No.
So there is a question from Marianne, and they're just asking for the shoemaker in the US. So that's American Duchess. They make reproduction shoes for many different periods for men and
Mhm.
women. Our next question comes from Gail Schwab. Have you studied millinery techniques professionally? Did you go to school to learn how to make hats? You do have a
No.
fashion degree, is that correct?
Yeah. Yeah, I have fashion degree
Me
indeed.
too.
Yeah, and also pattern making. So I did that later, a 3-year pattern making school, and then after that later I did costume history. So that's like 3 different schools that I did. I haven't done a professional millinery course, and I basically learned it because if you buy a pattern, you can buy like these ready-made patterns, then very often it comes with very good instructions on how to make it. So the way I make it is often based on like a canvas or a buckram, which is then etched with millinery wire. So like you cut the pattern part and you put like a metal wire around the outer edge, and that allows you to shape it, or that way it will stay in place, and then actually all those parts are covered in fabric and then sewn together. So that's the technique that I use the most if it's like a stiff hat.
Mhm.
But of course you also have a lot of like bonnets in the 16th and 17th century, and those are basically often just circles pleated into a band in all kinds of forms and shapes. So there's not an inner structure in those. And the one thing that I can't do is to felt a hat on
Oh, a
a hat
pulling
back.
hat.
Yeah. So I think that's really like a specialism, and of course you need like
A
a
lot of
block,
equipment.
yeah, to to felt your hat. So yeah, so that I haven't been able to do yet.
Yeah, I learned how to pull hats in college, but if you don't have your own hat blocks in a wide variety, it's not so useful a skill sometimes.
No, exactly. And what is actually quite nice, there are a couple of companies that sell like a pre-blocked hat. So it really looks like a floppy hat, like a summer floppy hat. So you really have like the circle, like the crown, let's say, and the brim, which is then really big. and that actually allows you to make quite a few styles. So you can make like the Napoleonic style with the how do you call it, the
A bicorn.
yeah, the bicorn or the tricorn, indeed.
Mhm.
Like those kind of styles you can
Mhm.
make with it. And actually also 17th century, because then I just put a flower pot inside of it and I use
Oh,
my
that's clever.
iron.
That's clever.
Yeah, to get the round, to flatten it
Wonderful.
on the
I
top.
never would have
So
thought of that. That's very clever.
yeah, and I do have that apret. It's like this chemical stuff that they use to stiffen the wool.
Mhm.
So I also bought a bottle of that, and that actually also allows you to keep the hat in shape, like the
Mhm.
tricorn or the bicorn. They're actually really, really stiff because of that chemical stuff you can put in it. Yeah. So those are actually very handy, those pre-blocked hats. Yeah.
So our next question comes from Gail Schward. Do you keep a journal or written record of each costume as you make it, listing materials, etc.? I know you have a blog, so maybe you could talk a little bit about documenting your processes and different events you go to.
Yeah, I keep I cut a little swatch of all the materials that I use on a costume. Also the ones that are not visible, like on the inside. So when my costume is ready, I have like an A4 or 2 A4s, like completely covered with little pieces of fabric. Yeah, so I remember what I actually was using. So that is one thing that I document. And then further, I also always document all my pattern updates. So from the pattern that I started with, what did I change? Like from to the second pattern, to the third, to the fourth pattern. So that's
I don't
always
do that
handy.
very well, so I admire that you can do that.
Yeah.
Very organized.
Yeah, it's just the notes that I also take when I'm fitting, and then I always just keep all those notes. And yeah, it's handy if you want to use that pattern again. Then you think, oh yeah, this is something I need to change or whatever.
Have you ever considered teaching?
Yeah, actually, I do teach also.
Oh, wonderful, wonderful.
Yeah, not like on a regular base, but I do a lot of like lectures or readings for schools.
Excellent.
Yeah, like an afternoon or something, and then also like some practical things that I teach the students how to make a cartridge bleed or how to make medieval buttons. You know, like these little things that you can just show in like a half an hour. Yeah, I'm actually at this moment I am teaching a fashion brand on how to make an historically accurate costume, and I'm making an Elizabethan costume with them. And it's actually made up from quite a lot of pieces. So we're already working on it for 6 months, but yeah, it's nearly finished. And
would you ever be interested in teaching online? We do definitely bring in a lot of online teachers from all over the place if you're interested.
Yeah, I always I'm just not so good with like filming and
Oh, we do our online classes live, so it's not too.
Okay, yeah. Well, let me
email you about. I can email you about that later. Wonderful.
Yeah.
So our next question comes from Helen Parsons. Is Angela writing a book about her costumes? That would be lovely.
I wish I had the time.
Oh.
Yeah, it's just, yeah, I mean, like I said, I also have a job, this is not my work. So yeah, I work 4 days a week, and then we have, of course, the costumes, the events, the teaching, we have so much going on. So there's a lot of stuff that I wish I could do, but then I think I would have to quit my job.
Oh.
Yeah.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
So we are getting close to the end of our time today. But I know there were a number of questions that people posed about resources, materials, and things like that. As Angela mentioned, she will be providing that, and you can, whenever it's convenient for her. So you can email me at lauren@sfsnad.org to request a bibliography and resource list from Angela. And our next question will probably be our last question, and that would be about upcoming events that you're appearing. There are some guests that are from the UK and the Netherlands that are interested in where they might be able to see you in person and see your work, or any of the events that you will be in the near future?
Yeah, I think the wisest thing to do is to actually go to our Facebook page. I think you see it here also at the bottom of the screen. Walking Through History with Jasper and Angela, because there we always place the agenda for all the events that we visit. And the first one is going to be in April. That's Elfia, or Kingdom of Elfia, and that's like a fantasy costume event. It's really big. It's near a castle in a small village close to Utrecht, which is in the center of the country. And that's not just historical costumes, but also a lot of fantasy costumes. And we're
Lovely.
always in the jury of the costume competition.
Wonderful.
So we're always there, definitely. And then we have another one in April coming up. And then again after that, I believe June, and then again in July. But I don't know the dates by heart. So it's best to go to our Facebook, and then you can actually see the event calendar there. Yeah.
I would also like to add, before we wrap up, your photography is really quite wonderful, and obviously for any type of visual art to document it. So can you talk just a little bit about making sure that you document the final result for your wonderful pieces?
Yeah, so the pictures of the work in progress, obviously I make those myself. And I usually make those pictures for the purpose to post it on Facebook and Instagram, to show people how I do it, because I don't have any secrets in that regard. I always
Good
like
to share.
I always like to show people how I do it, because I think there's almost no other way to learn it.
Absolutely.
Because this is something you can't learn, in a university or whatever. So you just really need to learn it from other people that do it, and that's also how I learned it. So I'm always very happy to pass on that information. And then the pictures from us in costumes, like for example the one that you see here on the screen. Yeah, we are so very fortunate to know photographers that can make all these beautiful pictures, because
They're wonderful.
I mean, yeah, you can make nice costumes, but if you don't have the photographers
Absolutely.
that can really,
No one will know.
make these pictures. I mean, if we take selfies, it looks really horrible. So without all these professional and also amateur photographers that make all these wonderful pictures, without them, I also never could have shared all these beautiful images. Yeah, so I'm very grateful that they're always on the events and everything. Yeah.
Wonderful. Well, once again, I'd like to thank our guests. Apologies if we were not able to get your questions. Again, a lot of them referred to sourcing and information, which we can provide later via email. This event is recorded, so if you missed some portion of it or would just like to watch it again, it will take us a few days to get the recording up, but it will be made available for you to rewatch. So I'm just going to go ahead and stop my recording.